Member from St. Andrews South Eastern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, I'm seeking clarity on a couple of matters. One, do the proceeds from the insurance payouts, whether they be the cap bond or the ones from CRIF, do those proceeds get paid into this particular fund? That's my first question. If that's so, then it's absolutely understandable why the 10 billion figure would be woefully low. And is there, in your contemplation of removing the cap, are you thinking of a higher figure, or you're just going to have no ceiling in terms of what that figure could be? We have obviously experienced a hurricane which has been considered the worst ever. And as such, we don't know whether we will be in this position in the future. So is there a contemplation of a ceiling or none whatsoever? And third, is there a requirement that if the funds are used up from this fund, do they have to be at the beginning of the next financial year taken from the consolidated fund to put back into it? I know I'm not sure if it is this particular fund, but my recollection is that there's a requirement that we reimburse if we use from a particular fund, if it's this disaster fund. So I'm just seeking clarity on those matters.
Member from St. Andrews Southern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, what you're seeking to do here today, I think, is uncontroversial. The establishment of this fund was done by a bill passed in 2024 that amended the Financial Administration and Audit Act. And what you're seeking to do here is to amend one paragraph of the provisions that were enacted by the 2024 bill. You mentioned in your presentation that in replacing that paragraph, which is paragraph A of subsection 1 of section 13A, you mentioned that one of the reasons for the amendment to A and the replacement of A is that in its existing form, it made reference to $200 million being put into this fund from the consolidated fund principal bank account during the financial year 2023-2024. And you made the point that the fund had not yet been established. What you didn't make reference to, though, was the next subparagraph, which is also being replaced. So, subparagraph Roman 2, which spoke to the need to put up to $1 billion in the fund during the financial year 2024-2025. And given that you had explained why you were replacing subparagraph 1, your omission in making a reference to subparagraph 2, which is also being replaced, made me wonder why you hadn't explained that as well. And is it that, what was the reason for replacing subparagraph 2? Is it that it didn't happen, that an amount up to $1 billion was put in the fund in the fiscal year 2024-2025? Is that why it's being replaced? I don't know. But I'm interested to find out why we're replacing that, if it in fact happened. The other point I want to make is this. Well, first of all, there is not a cap on the overall fund of $10 billion because the fund is comprised of a variety of potential sources of resources. Issues from the consolidated fund are dealt with by paragraph A, and those are the ones that are capped at $10 billion. But there are several other sources, for example, B, which are amounts received by the government from triggering national disaster instruments held by or on behalf of the government. So those are a separate source and are not covered by the $10 billion. And as you have indicated, although I didn't hear the date, and I asked you what the date was, but you didn't repeat it. You mentioned the figure in the fund of 115 approximately billion. I don't know as at what date that was, but clearly that's way in excess of $10 billion. And it's not unlawful because the cap only applies to amounts put into the fund from the consolidated fund, but the cap does not apply to the proceeds of national disaster instruments. Other potential sources are in C, unspent balances existing in any appropriation at the end of a fiscal year. So if there are unspent balances, the minister can determine that some or all of those unspent balances should go into this fund. Grants received, indeed, grants received from any source, specifically in relation to the objectives of the fund. So if Jamaica received a grant, which was specifically for natural disaster related relief, it should go into this fund. And E says such returns earned from investment monies in the fund, as may be determined by the minister. This suggests that the fund is actually a separate and segregated fund that can be invested to earn interest, whether on deposit or otherwise. And makes me wonder why we don't have accounts being produced of this fund, if that is the case. You know, there should be financial statements for this fund so we can see what's going on with it. And F says any other sources of funding approved by the minister by order subject to affirmative resolution for the purpose. So there are 6 different named sources of funding for this fund, of which A, which is a consolidated fund itself, is only one. And it is that one that is capped at 10 billion. But the others have no cap and could be as large as we are able to get them to be. One question I had for you, though, in relation to the wording of paragraph A, as this amendment would have it. It says, issues from the consolidated fund principal bank account of not less than $400 million annually. And then it goes on to say, so, however, that no issue shall be required under this paragraph of an amount that would result in the National Natural Disaster Reserve Fund exceeding $10 billion. And my question when I read it is, why are we keeping a cap? In other words, we know that we're susceptible to these deadly or devastating natural disasters. We've had 2 in 2 years. We know that global warming and climate change are realities that are going to be confronting us in the years to come. If there's an annual cap or annual floor of $400 million, which is in the scheme of things a modest sum, why do we want to retain a cap on the cash push amounts that go from the budget into this fund at $10 billion, which is where it was originally? I understand you're saying we are removing the cap, but we're also saying that once you reach 10 billion, you no longer have to make any contributions from the budget to this fund. And I'm just wondering whether that's prudent. I would have thought that we should, given the era we're in, we should continue to have the discipline of making these contributions annually, especially since there's no obligation to reimburse the fund. I can't find it anyway. I've looked. I don't see where in 13.8 it says if you draw down on the fund because there's been a disaster which has to be dealt with, there's no obligation to top it back up over a certain number of fiscal years or anything of that nature. So given that there's no obligation in the law to reimburse the fund, why are we keeping a limit? When I say a limit, why are we saying that you don't have to make contributions out of the budget of at least 400 million a year on an ongoing basis, regardless of whether the fund has reached 10 billion or not? That's really my question for you. Speaking for myself, I think we should just delete the words in the bill that come after the word annually in paragraph A and continue to contribute 400 million a year to this fund on an ongoing basis, regardless of where the amount is. Because 10 billion, as we've seen, is totally inadequate to address the likely consequences of any serious national disaster. So that's my suggestion there. I have one other comment, which is not on the content of the bill, but is more on the legislative process. And this has been triggered by my experience with this bill. So when I received the bill, when it was tabled last week, it was in long form, and it's an amending bill. I wanted to see the principal act, to see what was being changed, because on reading the bill in isolation, you have no idea of what it's doing or what it's saying. I tried on Parliament's website to find a complete copy, up-to-date copy of the Financial Administration Audit Act, or even of the legislation that had introduced this fund. Neither the bill that did that, nor the act that resulted when that bill was passed were available on Parliament's website. And Mr. Speaker, I must complain about the management of the website of Parliament in relation to legislation. It is not being kept current. I looked on it, there was one act for 2025 on the website of Parliament. And the 2024 did not have the Financial Administration Amendment Act 2024, which is a legislation that introduced this fund into our law. I checked on the Ministry of Justice's website. It's not there, because the Ministry of Justice's website only has the revised laws of Jamaica on it, and that the revised laws, colleagues, are the laws that result when the Acts of Parliament go through a law revision process, which the law revision commissioners oversee a process that is a technical process, that is to make sure that what goes into the revised laws is an accurate statement of the law, because so many of the legislation that we pass are amending. So you're changing this and changing that, and it's almost like creating a puzzle and making sure all the pieces of the puzzle are properly configured in the amending pages. So they haven't reached 2024 yet. So you can't find any legislation on the Ministry of Justice's website for 2024, much less 2025 or 2026. So I was at a loss. So I had to reach out to the Ministry of Finance and to the Office of Parliamentary Counsel, and they very kindly were able to provide me with the 2024 Amendment Act, which is this, which has enabled me to make this presentation here today. This is not good enough, Mr. Speaker. Our laws are important. Access to our laws are fundamental to the rule of law in the country. And I really think we need to do better, and the necessary human or other resources need to be put in place to ensure that the website of Parliament has all bills and all acts that have been passed or tabled or passed in this Parliament on a current basis. Too often, I have to be emailing Parliament and they tell me it's not yet done, and it is a chaotic and chaka-chaka system of running the Parliament and the legislative side of it. I had to raise that today, Mr. Speaker, because I think, these are not resource-constrained things. This is just a question of putting a little bit of effort and priority behind it, because it is important. And it is very important that we do that. So going back to the bill itself, Mr. Speaker, Minister, as I've said, it is uncontroversial. I do not understand why we are retaining a cap, so to speak, on the contributions that can be made into this fund, or at least saying that once 10 billion is in there, the consolidated fund, we no longer have to make annual contributions from the budget to the fund of at least 400 million. I think that is I would say we must make those contributions every year, because we know the times we're living in. We will need the money sooner or later, and it's good that it's there when we need it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.